Good evening. I was going to say the few, the brave, and the strong, but we got a good turnout given the weather conditions going on in Spokane. So it's beautiful to see all of you here tonight. I'm Dr. John Caputo. I'm a professor of communication arts and the Walter Ung Scholar in the Master's Program in Leadership and Communication here at the university. And as part of our work at the university, we have a major global initiative that kind of takes students around the globe. We say we'd take you out a tourist and bring you back a global citizen. It's a pretty ambitious project, but that's what our attempt is to do. And so whenever we can have somebody come and talk and share with you when we're thinking about that and how that is best seen, it's our opportunity. I want to say a few words. Because of the weather, we might have people coming in late or coming in, so don't worry about that, but there will be people still coming in over the next little while. The weather's pretty horrendous out there, so I'm really pleased to see you. But I do want to thank a couple of the co-sponsors of tonight before we actually get into tonight's program. So welcome to everybody. I see a lot of students in the audience. I'm always pleased to see students in the audience. And also to all the community people who came to support this event, both from our program and the Greater Spokane, Eastern Washington, North Idaho community on this. Co-sponsors of tonight's event are the Master's Program in Communication and Leadership, from which I come. Also, the Northwest Alliance for Responsible Media, whose interest is in media literacy and how to promote media literacy and open viewing and multiple stories. And so part of that project is to sponsor public television. So this is a co-event with KPS Public Television tonight. Also, the School of Professional Studies at Gonzaga has helped support this project, along with the Center for Global Engagement, who runs most of our study abroad programs, who helped sponsor this event tonight. In addition, the Faculty Speakers Committee here at the university gave us a little bit of funding, and of course, KSPS Public Television. So this is a co-sponsored event, raising funds for both our projects in Italy as well as KSPS Public TV. Those of you who can watch later in the evening, there actually is a telethon where Rick Steves' shows will be shown on KSPS. You can get it off of different numbers. I'm not going to tell you the station to tune in there. But some of us have volunteered to go up there and work the phone bank tonight. And Rick, of course, will be there talking and sharing some of his programming. He might tell you the particular episodes that will be shared there tonight. I also want to thank members of our planning committee, Dr. Heather Crandall and Kathy Gustafson of our program, Ann Price in the Center for Global Engagement, Emily Cagle, who's my graduate assistant, who's been very, very helpful for all this work, and Catherine Katuska-Kohut in the Study Abroad office, and of course all the folks at KSPS. One of the things you see some of these people with sort of sandwich boards going around, we do have a raffle, and later tonight there will be a raffle. Rick's Europe Through the Back Door organization has donated a series of beautiful gifts. The suitcase has been in my office all week, and I just wanted to take it and keep it, but no, it's part of the raffle, as well as 80 DVDs of all the European Through the Back Door programming that he's done, as well as other accessories and materials that'll be in that raffle. The raffle will be at the end of the speaking engagement, so you have to be here to win the raffle. If you haven't bought raffle tickets, you still have a chance. The raffle money is going for a scholarship program for people in our overseas study program in CAI. So if you want to buy raffle tickets, some of our students are wandering around with those raffle tickets. So there's gifts tonight as well. And in addition, Rick has donated a gift for each member of the audience that we have that we'll share with you, though if they haven't already been handed out. I just am extremely pleased to be introducing to you tonight our special guest, who is Rick Steves. I've had the good fortune of wandering into Europe through the back door approximately 20 years ago and finding Rick's travel books and television series always informative. My oldest son, who's now 34, has seen me watching Rick Steves so many times over the years that he now does an excellent, if irreverent, impersonation of Rick Steves. You have to know my son Giovanni to understand just how irreverent he can be. Once on a long-haul flight from London to Seattle, I sat next to Rick, but he just did a little bit of work and then slept the entire flight home, so I can do a pretty good impersonation of Rick sleeping. Oh, and he has that neck thing that goes around his neck that really helps the whole thing. Really, I have found his recommendations to fit me perfectly. A hotel on Lake Como, Lake Bled in Slovenia, a small trattoria like Il Contadino in Firenze, or a walking tour of Rome, all have worked out great and put me in touch with the local culture, which is what we really aim for with our students, not to go over as a tourist and come back a tourist, but to go over as a tourist and come back understanding the world. Rick Steves is an author, television and radio producer, and writes a regular travel blog. He also created a series of audio walking tour podcasts for museums and neighborhoods in Paris, Rome, Florence, Venice, and I believe there's a new one out on London if you want a podcast of that. As host and writer of the popular public television series Rick Steves Europe, the best-selling author of 40 European travel books, and he encourages travelers to travel as temporary locals. He helps American travelers connect much more intimately and authentically with Europe and Europeans for a fraction of what mainstream tourism costs. So when I had 4 kids, people said, how can you afford to go to Europe? I have Rick Steves Guide. I follow Rick Steves. He says this little hotel in Venice, all the hotels in Venice are sky high. This cheap place with the bird cage and the parrot speaks in Italian, perfect for me. I was jealous of that bird. I thought, oh, the bird's bilingual and I'm not. But nonetheless, I got there, right? Over the past 20 years, Rick has hosted over 100 travel shows for public television and numerous pledge specials, raising millions of dollars, and that's what he's going to be doing later tonight up at KSPS. He also created 2 award-winning specials for public television, Rick Steves' European Christmas and the groundbreaking Rick Steves' Iran. For several years, Rick Steves' Italy has been the best-selling international guidebook sold throughout the United States. I don't see very many people traveling in Italy without a Rick Steves book, and sometimes they even set it on the table because there's a discount for the food with the Rick Steves guide. There's pluses and minuses to that, and he can share that with you. In 2009, Rick tackled a new genre of travel writing with his book, Travel as a Political Act. And that's what the talk tonight will be, Travel as a Political Act. Reflecting on how a life of travel has broadened his own perspectives, and travel can be a significant force for peace and understanding in the world. It was this book that caught my attention a year ago because it rang true from my experiences. I had hoped our students would learn through our CAI project and other programs we have in Florence and places around the globe something different than just going there, staying in nice hotels, sampling Italian food. In fact, some people have came back from Italy and told me the only problem with Italy is there was no good Italian food. And when I asked them, what? Well, what do you like about Italian food? And they'd say, oh, Olive Garden, and I'd say, oh, well, there's the problem. A small trattoria run by Giuseppe and Joanna is not going to be like the Olive Garden. It's going to be the real thing as opposed to the not real thing. So I'm really happy that when I read this book and what it said and what it meant about world peace, I immediately got on the phone last spring and called Rick Steves' organization in Edmonds, Washington, inviting him to come to Gonzaga. Unfortunately, we couldn't afford him. He couldn't come, but his publicist, Ashley, said, but sometimes he does come over to Eastern Washington for pledge drives and other purposes. If he's out on the book tour, maybe he could come for no cost if you could just wait and be patient. And sure enough, this past spring, I got a call from Ashley. I was just getting ready to go to Italy that very day, and she said, he could come in November. Oh, wow, really? Really? Yes. And so the idea was he would come, we would do a joint project with KSPS, the pledge drive, and he's here really in this weather. Came up from San Francisco earlier in the day. So we're very happy that that happened, that his office called back, and that tonight, all of you can ask questions and learn from Rick's experiences. Now, Rick is outspoken on the need for Americans to fit better into our planet by broadening our perspectives through travel. He is also committed to his own neighborhood, however. He's an active member of the Lutheran Church. He's a board member of Normal, working to reform marijuana laws in the USA, and Rick has provided his local YWCA with a 24-apartment building which houses homeless women. So he's not only global, he's local. We have an expression in our program, think globally, act interculturally. And from my experience, Rick typifies that model that we have. I'm pleased to welcome Rick Steves to Gonzaga University.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's nice to be here, and I'm going to roll this out of the way so I can wander around. And I'm glad that we've got a good crowd today, in spite of this beautiful weather. So what I want to do today is share with you the lessons I've learned from traveling in Europe. And, you know, for years I was teaching budget travel tips. And then for years after that, I was teaching an appreciation of art and history and culture. And then in the last decade, I find myself really passionate about teaching how travel broadens our perspective, how travel gets us out of our comfort zones, how travel lets us become more comfortable citizens of this planet, as well as perhaps more thankful Americans. And it's sort of like how you evolve in your travels. First, you just want to pack light and catch the train. And then you want to be able to enjoy the museums and not be bored by all the great art and appreciate the cuisine and the wine. And then you want to broaden your perspective by becoming this different kind of traveler. Now, I never wanted to travel in the beginning. My parents dragged me to Europe back when I was a 9th grader or something like that. My dad imported pianos from Germany. So I went over to see the factories, went to see relatives in Norway. And I remember I was a 14-year-old with a bad attitude. And on about day 2, it occurred to me, no, it's not all that bad. There was different pop, different candy. I remember statuesque women with hairy armpits. And a couple years later, I was over in Germany again, and I was with my mom and dad visiting relatives in Norway, piano factories in Germany. And I saw kids just a couple years older than me, you know, with their Eurail passes and their little rucksacks and exciting destinations clicking up in the departure board. I remember it was in the Copenhagen train station, the classic old station, you know, and Berlin, Amsterdam, Stockholm. And I looked at those kids, and Europe was their playground. And I remember looking at my mom and my dad, and I just thought, I don't need you guys for this. I mean, I could be over here without mom and dad, you know? And I decided I'm going back to Europe every summer. I was a piano teacher. Kids wouldn't practice in the summer. I'm not going to push that. I'll see you in September. I'm going to Europe. And after a few trips, it was clear to me my trips were going smoother. I was learning from my mistakes. And I thought if I could just package the lessons from these mistakes into a class or a book, I could teach people how to travel. And I'd have a good excuse to go back to Europe every summer and update my material. So that's what I do. For the last 30 years, I've been going to Europe 4 months a year, making all the mistakes, taking careful notes, losing my traveler's checks just to see what'll happen, and coming home and teaching people how to learn from my mistakes rather than their own and travel smoother. Now, when I was a kid, I was idealistic, and I wanted to do something meaningful, and I thought, do I really want to dedicate my hard work? I was going to work hard and contribute, you know. Is it a noble thing to teach, you know, Americans to gallivant around the world? And I was aware of all the hunger and the desperation south of the border and so on. And I thought about what travel is all about. I thought, you know, my very earliest memories of travel were friends of mine, you know, adults that went over on vacation with their families, and they went down to the Caribbean on big cruise ships. And they took home photographs of what they called little dark kids jumping for their nickels. They'd stand on the deck of that cruise ship, throw their nickels off, and the kids would jump for it. And this was their greatest souvenir, how wealthy they were that they could get other kids to jump for their coins. And I just thought, well, that's kind of interesting, but it's not what I want to do. It doesn't bring us together. That exacerbates the difference between us and the rest of the world. And, you know, even today, that notion of travel, I believe, persists. For a lot of Americans, travel is still, see if you can eat 5 meals a day and still snorkel when you get into port. Now, when I say that at a cruise convention, people fidget nervously in their seats thinking, where is he going with this? But I don't say that in a judgmental way. I really don't. I just say that's not really travel. That's hedonism, you know? And I don't say that in a judgmental way either. I got no problem with hedonism. I'm a Lutheran. But I just thought travel should bring us together. That's my little personal joy. I can define travel the way I want to in my work, and travel is an activity, when it's done well, that brings us together. And I want to teach people how to come together through their travels. And that's more important now than ever. The irony is, when our country gets in tough straits with the rest of the world, we're disinclined to travel, when that's the worst thing we could do. Since 9/12, it's occurred to me, it is critical that Americans keep traveling. There's a lot of fear rattling around in our society. Have you noticed lately how many people are pushing fear? Fear is for people who don't get out much. And if somebody's trying to make you afraid, they've got an agenda, and it's not a good one. I have found that the flip side of fear is understanding. Many, many times I've been afraid. And what I do is I get on an airplane and I go there and I find out the media was messing around with me, you see. I want to know what it's like from personal experience. It's a beautiful thing. Now, when I give this talk, Travel as a Political Act, it's a little bit odd because I got the mic and I can just sort of, tell you how it is. But I'm actually I'm keenly aware of the fact that everybody, I just assume, in this room cares. No, I don't care more than other people. Everybody cares. Everybody has a different worldview. And everybody addresses these challenges according to their worldview, their life. The difference between my worldview and most people's worldview is I've spent a third of my life hanging out with people who find different truths to be self-evident and God-given. People who don't think the world is a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to get there. Until well into my adulthood, I really saw the world that way. It's a pyramid, we got it figured out, everybody else is trying to do it. They've all got the American dream, but some of them just have bad governments. And I really believed until well into my adulthood that if a country didn't get it, we, because we care and we're so good, would have every right to go in and elect them a government that did understand it our way. And then I realized you travel around the world and smart people see things differently. And that's a beautiful thing. That's something to celebrate. Not to be threatened by that, but to celebrate it. So what I want to share with you today is just some ideas about how travel has shaken up my ethnocentrism and turned me from a unilateralist to an enthusiastic multilateralist. And when you hear people talking about exceptionalism, you're going to hear a lot of that coming up in political discourse in our country lately. Exceptionalism. That means this 4% of the planet, we Americans, are more exceptional than everybody else. That is dangerous thinking. To me, that is wrong thinking, and it is not what we're all about. I want to, be thankful and proud of who we are, but to respect and acknowledge that the rest of the world can teach us a few things, and it's just good to get to know everybody. Now, as a travel, and by the way, we're going to go for about an hour, and then I think we'll take a 5-minute stretch. If you want to buy those raffle tickets, that would be a good time to do that. If you're wondering about should I be taking notes, if you're a student, I guess, yes, you should be. But if you're just want to sit back and relax, I'm just kind of covering what's in this book, all right? So this is just a lively version of this book. And the book, your local bookstore has the book at a pretty good discount back there, $15 including tax. And it can get autographed, and that'll make it worth $15 including tax. So I'll be around afterwards and autograph your books. Okay, but all the information's in there. I set out to write this book, by the way, thinking I could just give my talk to the book, but it was terrible reading. So what I did was I deconstructed this talk and I put it back into the actual travel experiences from where I learned those ideas, and I think it works much better. So the book is sort of field studies and what I'm talking about in situ, where I learned those things. Now, and most of my anecdotes and so on are from Europe, because that's my beat. I teach people how to travel through Europe. And I see Europe as the wading pool for world exploration. My favorite country is India, all right? I'd much rather go to Sri Lanka or Nepal or Indonesia or Thailand than Europe. But my work is Europe. That's the big market. That's where Americans go first, where they realize there's more to life than vacationing in Hawaii or Florida or Baja California, and you can actually go to countries that speak different languages and so on. It's just really the springboard. Once you do Europe and have a good time, then you're more likely to go to South Asia or whatever. So my experience and most of my examples will be in Europe. My job as a travel writer is to bring home the magic. I need to make Europe travel magic. And there's so many wonders that you can experience if you're a good traveler. I mean, there's natural wonders. We have natural thrills here, especially in the Northwest. But the nice thing about Europe's natural wonders is they're so accessible. You can ride the lift up and have breakfast in a revolving restaurant on top of the mountain and then walk out on the ridge. I'm quick to do that. I love to get up there sweat-free and then spend the whole day on a ridge. tight-roping on a ridge. I mean, imagine this, 3 hours walking on a ridge like this. On one side, you got lakes stretching all the way to Germany. On the other side, you got the most incredible alpine panorama anywhere, the Eigermonk and Jungfrau, cut-glass alpine peaks. And ahead of you, you hear the long legato tones of an Alp horn, announcing that the helicopter-stocked mountain hut is open. It's just around the corner and the coffee schnapps is on. Wow, that's a good travel moment, and anybody can have that. And then when you come home, you actually have a better affinity and enthusiasm, I think, for nature. Culture really is exciting when you travel. Now, I, for 25 years, was a tour guide, and I have psychoanalyzed this, and a lot of good Americans are threatened by people who are enthusiastic about things that we didn't know you could be enthusiastic about. And we draw back, and we think, are you telling me stinky cheese is important? We fought and died for your freedoms, and I'm not going to let you tell me that my cheese is less than your cheese. You know, and people take offense to that. And it's not they're better than us. It's third grade show and tell in an international sort of arena. They're enthusiastic about this. It's fun. It's a celebration. Cheese is a great example. When you go to France, they are evangelical about cheese. Cheese was no big deal for me. I grew up thinking cheese is orange in the shape of the bread. There you go, cheese. You step into this shop here in Paris, and it's a festival of mold. And I have these great friends that take me shopping with them. They run restaurants, and I just love going shopping with them. And I'm their little bumpkin, and they just want to turn me on to all these great things about the cuisine. And my friend Marie-Elise would take a piece of cheese, a big moldy wad, take a deep whiff. Oh, Rick, smell this cheese. It smells like the feet of the angels. Come on. Well, you know, maybe she's that into cheese. I think that's really fun to find that different people are enthused about different things. I became really enthusiastic about history because of my travels. In fact, I remember waking up in the dorm one morning at the University of Washington, and it occurred to me, you know, I almost have a history degree. I got my history degree like accidentally. I had 7 history classes before I knew I was going to be a historian, 3 more classes, and I got the degree. It was just storytelling. They were giving me credits for this. It was so much fun because I had been there, and I wanted to know more about Napoleon or the Reformation or the Inquisition or whatever that was being taught. And you go to Europe, and the history is meaningful. As a tour guide, it is my challenge to help people be inspired to take history as a joy, seriously. Not something just in the past, but we're part of history today. It's unfolding all around us. 100 years ago, they'll write books about this decade in America, in Europe, and it's going to be fascinating stuff. History. We're there. When you travel, give yourself opportunity and permission to get caught up in the history. An example is here in Berlin. I was in Berlin, happened to be there on opening day of their new parliament building. This is exciting if you're into European history. Of course, you know, through most of our lifetimes, Germany was divided, government and Bonn. Suddenly, the wall's down, Germany's united, the government goes from Bonn back to Berlin, and they have this bombed-out hulk of a parliament building on no man's land, on the wall, right? That was the Reichstag building. Now, all of a sudden, they need a new parliament building. In good European style, they don't bulldoze the burned-out building, they renovate the historic building and incorporate a modern architectural element into its top. And this is their new parliament building. It's free. It's open long hours, designed primarily for Germans, but tourists are more than welcome to walk up that spiral ramp to the very top and literally look down over the shoulders of their legislators. Powerful architectural symbolism. Now those German parliamentarians, those German congresspeople, are going to know that their electorate is up there looking down on them. Those people have been jerked around too much in the last century, and they're going to keep an eye on their politicians physically this way. I was up there on top of that brand new dome on opening day, surrounded by teary-eyed Germans. Now, anytime you're surrounded by teary-eyed Germans, something exceptional is going on. And it occurred to me, wow, this is a very important moment, a symbolic turning point in the history of a great nation. With the opening of this great new parliament building, it was the symbolic closing of an ugly chapter in the history of these people. No more division, no more war, no more communism, no more fascism. A united country with a new Capitol building, entering a new century filled with promise and hope. Wow, and most of those teary eyes were old enough to remember their city, Berlin, literally not 2 bricks standing on top of each other. I mean, from the early 50s and late 40s when it was bombed out after World War II. What an exciting place to be. And I looked around at the other American tourists up there, And none of them had a clue of how exciting it was. They were just wondering, why didn't they air condition this place properly, and where can I get a Coke, and my battery's running low. And it just saddened me. I remember thinking up there, I thought, I am living in a dumbed down society. And I just thought, in my own little world, I'm not going to accept that. As a travel writer, I'm going to expect my travelers, my viewers, my listeners, my readers to be smarted up rather than dumbed down. I want them to be engaged. Powerful forces find it convenient if we're just dumbed down. Just go shopping. And the challenges confronting us are too important for us to let other people do the thinking. We cannot stand in our own little worlds, whatever your niche in life is, to dumb people down or let them dumb us down. We can smart each other up. It's a beautiful thing. In travel, it goes against the grain. The travel industry is not into thoughtful travel. They're into duty-free shopping, frequent flyer miles, fun in the sun. What's the power of your sunscreen, all right? Now, that's not bad in itself, but if that robs you from the opportunity to grow in your travels, then I think it's a problem. I'm so thankful that the Travel as a Political Act book got the Travel Book of the Year award from the Society of American Travel Writers this year, the Lowell Thomas Award, because that means that the whole industry is recognizing, to honor that book, you know, I mean, it's nice for me, but just the whole notion that travel can broaden our perspectives has been embraced by the mainstream travel industry. I'm so thankful for that. People are realizing you can have that kind of a get out of your comfort zone travel experience. One great thing about travel is you meet people you wouldn't meet otherwise. I just love it. I mean, you know, we have a great time here, but we surround ourselves with people that are a lot like us. When you go somewhere else, you're talking to people you wouldn't otherwise be talking to. It's very stimulating. It's growing. I meet more interesting people in a month in Europe than I do in the rest of the year here in the States. It doesn't have to be earth-shaking encounters. It can be just goofy little things. A little while ago in Italy, this kid was just staring at me. It's kind of rude. Finally, his dad said, "Excuse my son, he stares at American tourists." I said, "Well, what's with that?" And he said, "Well, last week we were at McDonald's and we were having our hamburger, and my son noticed the fluffy white bun, and he said, 'Dad, why do Americans have such soft bread?' And the dad told his son, 'Because Americans have no teeth.'" And, you know, I think the dad wasn't meaning anything. He was just having fun. But he confused his son, and now the son looks at Americans to see if they have teeth, so I showed him mine. And, you know, I thought, well, you know, that's a silly example, but, you know, there's a lot of silly misunderstandings between cultures, and when we travel, we can, you know, break those down. One of my favorite countries to travel anywhere is Ireland. And I think one major reason why I love Ireland so much is because in Ireland I have this sensation that I'm understanding a foreign language. I don't know what that's like, but boy, I really envy people who speak another language. And in Ireland, people have the gift of gab, first of all, and they have this art of conversation. And my theory is that the people who are most fun to talk to in Ireland speak Irish or Gaelic as a first language, and that's the template for the way they communicate, and they translate literally into English. When you want to see Ireland in the extreme, you go to the west coast, places shaded green on the map, they're called Gaeltachts. Ireland, humble as that economy may be, values its traditional lifestyles to the point where they create national parks for the traditional culture, where the government subsidizes traditional lifestyles, small family farms and so on, just because they think it's important for their society to know from where they came. Not good for business, good for the fabric of that society. That sort of notion wouldn't float here. But over there, they're enthusiastic about that. They have a program where kids from the big cities can go out into the West Coast and learn a little Gaelic and learn the dances and learn the songs. I just love that. I'm so inspired by that. Way on the west coast of Ireland, when they stand on the edge of the island, look out at the Atlantic and they say, the next parish over is Boston. I was talking to these guys, and whenever I get into a conversation with these Irish guys, forget any itinerary plans for that day. This is what travel's all about. There's no site in Ireland more interesting than talking to these two guys. All right? And I'm deep into this conversation. After a while, I asked the guy on the left, "Were you born here?" And he said, "No, it was about 5 miles down the road." A few minutes later, I asked him, "Have you lived here all your life?" And he said, "Not yet." You just got to love that, I think, when you're in Ireland. The big news in Europe, of course, is the unification of Europe. And we always hear the bad news about Europe. Like right now, there's bad news about Europe, and the Euros are going to make it or whatever. But, you know, Europe is here to stay. The notion of Europe is I think, well established now. And when you think about the unification of Europe, you got to remember Europe has created a free trade zone of 400 million people with an economy as big as the United States, $13 trillion produced in a year. The United States, a free trade zone of 300 million people producing $13 trillion. Europe, 400 million. Now, if you think about the beginnings of Europe, think about Europhiles, Eurovisionaries, caring statesmen sitting on the rubble of a bombed-out continent in 1947, marveling at how they have destroyed themselves twice in their lifetime, thinking we've got to do something a little more innovative here or it's going to happen again. We need to create a United States of Europe. We need to interweave our economies to the point where Germany and France will never again go to war against each other. There's been a lot of goofy stuff about Europe, but in 50 or 60 years since then, they have interwoven their economies to the point where I don't think a war between France and Germany is conceivable now. That makes all the other foibles of the European Union small stuff. Europe is a triumph because of that. Now, when you think about Europe, it's a stuttering kind of progress. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. News when it goes back, and then trudging forward. But it's come a long way in 60 years, and it's got some serious challenges. But it's quite exciting to see what Europe has done. Now, proponents of our system would look at Europe's system and say, those idealistic Europeans, look at their economy as a basket case. They're so socialistic, they don't make anywhere near as much money as we do. Well, true, 400 million Europeans make $13 trillion, and we make that much with 300 million people. But the complete sentence is, they make less per person than we do, but they make, by every measure, as much as we do per hour, and they choose to work less hours. So, you know, it's not a right or wrong thing, but they just play more. And I think it's interesting when you go to Europe, it's almost annoying. It's sort of in your face when you're traveling around in Europe. You see the energy that you've got, and then you see these guys playing around. It's Wednesday afternoon, and I ask these guys, "What's going on? Shouldn't you be working?" And they say, "No, it's Wednesday afternoon." These are men. These are not kids. This is what they're doing for fun, and it's just Europeans play a lot, and of course they work a lot. We Americans have the shortest vacations in the rich world. We are just mindlessly working ourselves into an early grave by the assessment of some people that don't understand what we're doing. I've got a friend in Seattle who's produces TV shows for public television, and he runs a little movement. It's called Take Back Your Time, and his whole thing is to try to teach Americans that, you know, we could have a shorter vacation if we wanted to make less money and have a better balanced life, more European style or whatever. And he's reminding us that we have the shortest vacations in the rich world, and his national holiday is October 23. Because by his estimate, if you were a European working as hard as Americans do, October 23 would be the last day you need to go to work. Sort of an annoying thought, but it's just what the Europeans do. Now, excuse my clicker, it's not quite as strong as I'd like it to be. There's a lot of chaos in our economy and a lot of uncertainty and chaos in Europe's economy. And, you know, I'm just a tour guide and a travel writer and an enthusiast about traveling through Europe, but I'll give you my take on this. I believe the United States and Europe has been living beyond our means, and finally get a reality check and we have to readjust things. Europe is really into its entitlements. And when you have entitlements, and we're going to be looking at our entitlements in our society too, you cannot just take people's entitlements away because their mom and dad worked hard and got that. Now you've dedicated your life to that promise, they're not going to take it away. But those entitlements are based on the assumption that there's a young society with a lot of people working, a few people retiring, and those who retire don't live very long. With that sort of a system, with that sort of demographic makeup of a society, you can have these great entitlements for old people. Now, Europe is a geriatric continent. Not many people, because when you're rich, you have less kids. Europe is very rich, and their population is way down. So you have less people working and a need for immigrant laborers, more so than we have. And you have a lot of people retiring because of modern lifestyles and health. They're living a long time. It's simply, the arithmetic is not there. That's not sustainable. Now, what politician can stand up and say, you know, less entitlements, higher taxes, work longer hours, retire later in life? That's political suicide, but it's the truth. Sarkozy's doing it in Paris right now, and there's 1 million people marching in the streets. Why are they marching in Paris? 1 million angry people because Sarkozy said you're gonna have to work to 62 instead of 60. And Europeans march. That's what they do when they're angry. That's a manifestation. That's what you do, is you get in the streets with thousands of people and march. It's way too much exercise for Americans, but Europeans do it this way. Americans just find a TV channel that affirms their fears, and then they go, yeah, right on, you see. I was just in Greece. You know, Greece is in the headlines. I mean, it's worse than France. And I was there. This is what I do. When there's scariness, I go there, just to sort of understand if it is scary, because I got tour groups that are going there. I want my people to be safe and have a good time. Mad cow disease in England, I go right to England and pet cows. So I went to Greece a couple months ago and talked to people. They've got anarchists in Greece, troublemakers, you know. And you got an economic problem. Teachers are angry. Teachers are demonstrating in front of the parliament. The anarchists, there's about 100 of them, live a 10-minute walk away from the parliament. They get on their scooters, go down there and burn a few Starbucks and tip over a car and break a few windows. And it goes on the news, and it sounds like, you know, everything's falling apart in Greece. It's just a few anarchists getting headlines, and then everything goes back to normal. Demonstrations are part of the way Europeans communicate. It's part of the healthiness of their society, I believe. There's going to be a lot of demonstrations. In a place like Greece, if you were 1 month older than your friend, one of you gets to retire at 59 and the other has to work until they're 67. Last year they made an 8-year jump in how long you have to work until you retire. That's enough to make anybody get out in the streets if you're on the short end of that stick. The big news in Europe is the movement to the east. A few years ago, essentially the entire Warsaw Pact joined the European Union. Overnight, 100 million new capitalists. And the geographic center of Europe shifts from Belgium to the Czech Republic. That's big news for Europe. And, of course, there's bumps in the road now with this economic crisis, but generally, Eastern Europe has been really catching up fast. It's a remarkable story. It's a festival of pent-up entrepreneurial spirit in Eastern Europe. You go to Poland, and it's just like people are dancing in the streets. There's all sorts of new businesses. I was just in Tallinn. We're going to show, I don't think we're showing Tallinn tonight, but it's one of our new TV shows on Estonia. And it's remarkable how fast Eastern Europe is catching up with the West because they love this work hard, produce, get rich kind of arrangement. Now, when you travel in Eastern Europe, you will find that here, like everywhere, there's an incredible sort of diversity. And in our lifetime, we can think of all the tumult in Europe, it seems has been regions challenging nations. Now there's 3 different loyalties in Europe: region, nation, and Europe. You could ask somebody in Munich, where are you from? And they might say Bavaria, or they might say Germany, or they might say Europe. If you talk to a friend in Barcelona and say, where are you from? They might say, I'm Catalonian, or I'm Spanish, or I'm European. Every city hall in Europe has 3 flags on it these days: the region, the country, and Europe. It's very interesting to me that what people like me, Europhiles, really love about Europe is the variety, and as Europe unites, it's counterintuitive, but the regional variety gets more distinct and more vital, because regions threaten nations, and nations are withering away. You see, the people in Barcelona threatened Madrid. The people in Brittany threatened Paris. The people in Scotland threatened London. As Europe unites, London and Paris and Madrid are not threatened by the regions anymore because you can secede from Spain, but you cannot secede from Europe. And Brussels, which is the capital of Europe, favors regions over political entities. They like the ethnic regions. So it's a fascinating dynamic right now, and you'll find the little languages of Europe are being more widely spoken now than they were a generation ago. People are waving their flags. For the first time since 1707, Scottish people have a parliament in Scotland, in Edinburgh. And now people can gather after Mass on Sunday in Barcelona and dance their circle dance, the Sardana, to celebrate their Catalonian heritage. Franco would have locked them up, because Franco was threatened by Catalonians. Now, Catalonian people are teaching their kids to speak Catalan first in the schools and Spanish second. When you go to an ATM machine in Barcelona, you'll notice what I'm talking about. We think of Spain as Spanish-speaking people. But if you go to a Subway sandwich shop in Madrid, there's a good chance the menu will be in 4 languages, all of them Spanish languages. Because in Spain, you've got Catalonian in Catalan, you've got Espanol for most of the country, Gallego for Galicia in the northeast or northwest, and Euskara for Basque people. You go to an ATM machine in Barcelona, you will always have Catalan, Spanish, Gallego, Euskara, the 4 Spanish languages, then German, French, English, and everybody else. Now, if you go to an ATM machine in Basque country, I promise you, you will have Basque up here, and you will have Catalan on the buttons. Not because visiting people from Catalan need Catalan to get money out of a machine there, they'd speak Spanish or English or whatever, but because of solidarity. These ethnic underdogs stand together. I was recently traveling in Northern Ireland, and not many people go to Northern Ireland, Ulster, on vacation. I noticed a ridiculous amount of Basque and Catalonian tourists in Northern Ireland. And I talked to them, what are you doing up here? Well, we're up here because we have an affinity for our fellow victims of the tyranny of the majority, the Catholics living under Protestant rule in Northern Ireland. And then, on the other side of the coin, I noticed on the City Hall flagpoles, there were Israeli flags in Ulster. What's with that? Well, the Protestants, who are keeping down the Catholics, were planted there by London centuries ago, and they're dealing with all sorts of headaches because of this. They're not bad people, they just are the result a few generations later of being planted for political purposes, and they got a divided society with a lot of violence and discord. And they have an empathy for Israelis, who are planting people in Palestine for the same reason England planted people in North Ireland. So there's fascinating little case studies that you can see, and to gain an affinity for the struggles of these people in your travels gives you a much richer travel experience, I would say. This man's name is Armin Walsh. He is the Indiana Jones of Tyrolean archaeologists. He's so enthusiastic. He's got all sorts of exciting plans. He wants to find all the medieval castles and renovate them and turn them into museums. Takes a lot of money. When Armin needs money, he does not go to Vienna, because he'll get nothing. He goes to Brussels. And he doesn't go to Brussels saying, I got a great project for Austria, even though he lives in Austria. He goes there and he says, I got something really cool for the Tyrol. Because the Tyrol is not a political unit. The Tyrol is an ethnic region that ignores political boundaries, part in Austria and part in Italy. In fact, the town Tyrol, which the Tyrol is named after, is actually in Italy. Armin will come back with money from Austria because Austria is funding ethnic ventures like this because Europe likes the ethnic health of the continent. Now, when you join the European Union, you are either a net giver or a net receiver, depending on what your national economy is compared to the European average. If you're a wealthy country, you give more than you get. And you do it with a good spirit because you're a free trade zone and you're only as good as your weakest link, right? And if you're a poor country, you're lucky to be on board because you're going to get subsidized by the rich countries until you lift your society up from an infrastructure and economy point of view. The first big iteration of the European Union, 10, 15, 20 years ago, the 3 poor countries were Ireland, Portugal, and Greece. They were the net receivers. Back then, there were no freeways in those countries, almost literally no freeways. Today, they're laced with freeways. And with every new freeway in Portugal, Ireland, and Greece, you will see a sign with the European flag on it. This one says, this project has received 85% financial assistance from the European Union. That means France and Germany. And that means, okay, we bought you these roads, now use them, work, produce. We're going to keep up with America, you see. So that's this whole spirit of Europe investing in its infrastructure, like we did with our interstate system, I think, in the 50s. It was a smart move. Poor states, rich states, all got federal money to make that infrastructure so we could have a mighty economy. All my life, I've been crossing the Gulf of Corinth with a little ferry. Then a couple of years, I go there, and there's this huge bridge. Bam, all of a sudden, in Greece, a big bridge. And I thought, Greeks don't build bridges like that. The Greeks would take the boat for the rest of time. Okay? This is a German bridge, built by Germans for German trucks to get their gummy bears down to the Peloponnesian Peninsula. And it just makes sense. Germany wants to have access to that market. Doesn't it make sense? So they invest, and that's a European Union adventure. All over Europe, they're investing in their infrastructure. They've got sort of an internal Marshall Plan. It's quite exciting. I think about the stimulus spending. You know, I just drove up the Oregon coast over all of these beautiful bridges that were built in the 1930s with stimulus spending. You know, it's not burning money. It's making work that is going to stoke things up and try to have a long life. And 80 years later, these bridges are elegant and beautiful, made from a stimulus that brought us out of a depression way back then. Europe is investing in its infrastructure, and it's got some sort of stimulus notion also. You go to Berlin now, it's got the biggest train station in all of Europe, the new Hauptbahnhof. Major train lines coming together on different levels at right angles. It's just breathtaking. I was in Munich recently taking pictures of trains coming into the station, specifically taking pictures of cute little birds squished onto the windshields of those trains. And I looked at that little dead bird and I thought two things. First of all, I thought, boy, this is a dangerous place if you're a slow bird. And then I thought you'd wait all your life to see a bird squished onto the windshield of a train where I live. You know, I just never even conceived of a bird squished onto the train. Trains don't go that fast in the United States. But in Europe, it is really exciting to get on those bullet trains. Now you see this in your travels. And you don't see this as much as you used to, but you still do, and you always will. I promote tourism. I'm trying to sell tours, and I want my people to be happy when they go to Europe, and I don't want them to think Europeans don't like you. Well, you can be in Madrid, and it's a city of 4 million people, and 3 million of them can be out in the streets in a driving rainstorm with anti-American banners, you know, if we go to a war that they don't agree in. I mean, Europeans just yell when they don't like something. And you see a lot of this Stop USA, and I just want to remind you, that doesn't mean anti-you or anti-me. It doesn't mean anti-America. It certainly doesn't mean anti-American values, American ideals, you know, what America is all about, this liberty and freedom and stuff. It is anti-American trade policies, or anti-American military policies, or they don't like what the president said, or something like that. So they do that. It's sort of hurtful to see that, but you got to understand it's not against us or our country. It's against a trade policy generally. Now, a lot of Americans wimp out and accessorize with this little bit of decoration. You know, that is really poor character, I got to say. You are an American, so, you know, deal with it. Don't fake you're a Canadian. And besides that, you don't need to apologize for being an American. They'll accept you as an individual. If you're a unilateralist and you think we should be writing other people's textbooks, well, you can debate those people and you're going to be outnumbered, and they're pretty good debaters, you know. But if you're an open-minded type traveler, you'll find it's a blessing, it's a plus to be an American, okay? You don't need to hide the fact that you're American, and you can travel anywhere in Europe and be warmly received. You know, we take 1,000 people to France every year in our tours. And I'm very concerned that people have a good time and are received warmly. I survey these people after their trip and ask them how you were received and so on, and nobody ever complains about the reception they receive in France. If you're a decent, open-minded traveler that's not pushing your values on them and you want to learn from them instead of teach them, you'll be warmly received and you'll enjoy the people that you meet. As a matter of fact, in France, and I use France as an example because a lot of Americans just can't handle the fact that France will not march into whatever military adventure we want them to march into. You know, they're a self-respecting sovereign nation. They're not going to follow us into every war we choose to go in. It just hurts them to see us pouring out fine French wine. I guess that's a very, it confuses Europeans to see us pouring out French wine when they won't join us in a war. I was filming in the most traditional conservative part of France, Burgundy. And when I'm filming, I got work to do. I'm not very polite. I don't have time to party. I've been going to this mom and pop chateau for years. There's an adorable couple that's been in their family for ages. And I come in and I say, the sun's going down. I need to get up on the roof to get a wide shot of the ramparts, you know. And they say, no, first we must have a little party. No, the sun's going down. We got to make our TV show. No, first we must have a party. Okay, let's have a party. And they bring on the nice wine and the cookies, the crackers and the cheese. And then, sort of almost like a religious relic, they bring out this precious 48-star American flag that they hoisted over their chateau on that great day in 1944 when their village was liberated from Nazi tyranny by American troops. And they say, we want you to go home and tell your friends that we will always be thankful for the valor and the love of America when we were in our darkest days, you know. And I guess I could give a whole talk on anecdotal examples of how Europeans have reminded me how thankful they are for us standing up against the Nazis and the Soviet Union. And our might has been really critical for European freedom and what they're enjoying today. But there's a disconnect when Americans think that they should, because of that, follow us in all of our policies now. It's just, there's no rationality there. So it's something you got to think about in your travels and give Europeans an understanding that they are appreciative of what we've done for them. Europeans celebrate that the strength of America. When Reagan said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall, that was a very powerful statement. And most Europeans believe that it was American economic might that outlasted Russia in the Cold War. The arms race was a battle of economic attrition, very expensive for us, it left us in debt, but it collapsed the Soviet Union, and thank goodness we got out of the Cold War without a hot war. And today there's no threat from Russia to Europe like there might have been without the United States. But you don't have a lot of Europeans today named Frankie and Johnny. I've got a lot of friends who are a few years older than me named Frankie and Johnny in Europe. And they were named by parents who were just enamored with the valor and the goodness of American troops that they met. And they were so crazy about American culture that they'd name their kids after big American pop stars, Frankie and Johnny. And it's amazing, all over Europe you meet these Frankies and Johnnies. So there was a time when we had that national brand, that goodwill, that was really quite powerful. And then for a whole decade, since 9/11, America has been the kiss of death in any kind of marketing in Europe. I mean, you know, California Jingles used to sell cars in Germany. And I've got friends in marketing in Europe that their job was to comb anything that smelled like America out of their jingles because America didn't sell anymore. I was lobbying for Bread for the World in Washington at Congress last year. And I learned two things. One, the brand of America. I was trying to get them to relieve the debt of third world countries. And they didn't have money to relieve the debt of third world countries because we were trying to get them to relieve $5 billion worth of debt from the most desperately poor countries on the planet, whose half of their national budget is paying interest on that debt back to the first world, and it's just keeping them in poverty. And that same month, we were giving $5 billion of military aid to Colombia to fight their drug war. $5 billion. And my friends in Congress just told me, well, we're just selling helicopters. People are making money when we sell them that stuff. It's $5 billion to them so they can buy that stuff from us, and it stokes our economy. But that's kind of the misuse of that kind of aid. Well, the point is, the brand of America today needs to be better if we're going to import stuff, because if people don't like our country, they're not going to want to buy our stuff. And the brand of America is improving, but that's a challenge for us from an economic point of view. The other thing I learned in the halls of Congress was, the comment I kept hearing was soft power as opposed to hard power. There was an inkling that you could get more national security by investing in soft power instead of hard power. Soft power would be undercutting poverty in chaotic corners of the world rather than military strikes and so on. So there's interesting thinking going on, but these challenges are something you can think about when you're traveling and talking to other Europeans. Terrorism is a concern for a lot of travelers, and understandably so. And as somebody who's been teaching travel and leading tours for 30 years, there's always been terrorism, and I believe there always will be terrorism, and America will always be targeted. Now, we've got to get a grip about terrorism. Terrorism is overrated, okay? I'm not belittling the risk of some catastrophic in-our-country sabotage that kills tens of thousands of people. I think that's a serious problem that needs to be dealt with as energetically as anybody else. I'm talking about your safety if you choose to travel overseas. That is not a concern with terrorism, I don't think. Every year, 12 million Americans go to Europe, and every year, 12 million come back. There may be a bomb in London or a bomb in Madrid. That's tragic. Local people die. If you're very unlucky, you could get caught in that and be a victim also. But the fact is, 12 million go, 12 million come back. Tomorrow, if an American is beheaded in Madrid by a jihadist, it doesn't matter. It is still safe to travel. You cannot be terrorized by the terrorist, or you are helping them out. You've got to keep it into a non-emotional, sensational, statistical frame of mind. In our country, every month 1,000 people die violently because we have a lot of guns. It's not an issue, it's not a liberal or a conservative statement, it's just a fact. We're a mighty nation of 300 million people, and as a free, well-educated democracy, we affirm the fact that it's worth 12,000 American lives a year to have the precious right to bear arms. Now, that's a very easy case to make, because we're 300 million people. We're not 20,000 people, we're 300 million. We have something that's important, it's not perfect, we lose 12,000 people a year, that's how it's going to be last year, that's how it's going to be next year. Europe decides not to have the right to bear arms because they don't want to lose so many people to violence. It's nice to have guns, but people die, so that's more important than the niceness. So they choose no guns, they lose 1/8 of the people to violent events in the street that we do. Europeans laugh out loud when they hear that Americans are staying home for safety reasons. It's almost comical how Americans overreact to terrorism. And I'll tell you, if you got your head on your shoulder properly, if you care about your loved ones, you'll take them to Europe tomorrow. We live in a dangerous country. We really do. It's much safer in Europe, regardless of the headlines, than it is walking the streets of Spokane. Okay, there's just no question about it. It's just sensationalism with this terrorism. So I know it's not popular to say terrorism is a lot of hype and overrated, but we need to get a grip, because something's going to happen down the road and we're all going to freak out again. And we just got to understand. We lose 70,000 people on the roads every year. Everybody knows you could save 20,000 American lives every year, 20,000 lives a year, if you agreed to drive 50 miles an hour instead of 70. Would you drive 50 instead of 70 to save 20,000 lives? Hell no. I wouldn't. Get real. I got places to go. We're a mighty nation of 300 million people. We drive fast and we lose a few. That's just the way it is. Now when it comes to terrorism, every time, if I ever write about America being an empire, it's a real hot-button issue with Americans. We hate the thought of being an empire. It angers Americans. So it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what 96% of humanity thinks. 96% of humanity looks at us and sees an empire. Not a bad empire or a good empire, just an empire. We are 4% of this planet. We spend as much as everybody else put together on our military. We have military bases all over the planet. Only we can declare somebody else's natural resources on the other side of the globe vital to our, quote, national security interest. The people who own those resources would at least like us to be candid enough to say vital to our accustomed material lifestyle instead of cloaking it in something more high and mighty. We just want their stuff, and we got the guns to get it. It's remarkable how the rest of the world looks at us and we don't understand what they see. When it comes to issues of desperate importance to the miserable half of humanity trying to live on $3 a day, we are outvoted in the United Nations routinely 140 to 4. 140 to 4. I try to be credible. I check this stuff every time I'm giving a talk. I go to the web and I read about it, And over again in the United Nations, it's 140 to 4 on issues like child labor in the third world, landmines, militarization of outer space, water issues, third world debt, and so on. Who stands with us? Israel, Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. Now, to be honest, I don't know how it's changed in the 2 years since Obama's been in, but it's probably not a lot different. It's just a very interesting sort of dynamic. Now, throughout history, there's never been an empire that didn't have angry people on its borders nipping at it. That's just what happens when you're an empire. And empires always dehumanize or degrade these enemies by calling them something insulting. Barbarians, Romans had barbarians. Habsburgs, what did they have? Anarchists. There's an anarchist that killed Franz Ferdinand. And terrorists, we've got terrorists, okay? So I think as long as we're perceived as an empire, we've got to get used to having a terrorist threat. And we've got to keep the risk in stride. And we've got to be real about what is the cost of living out your economic footprint on this planet where everybody else sees you as an empire. You're going to lose a few people, or you're going to have that struggle. So that's kind of the story with terrorism. In Europe, again, I wouldn't give it a second thought. I always think it's more dangerous here in the United States than over there. When you travel, you realize each country has its own 4th of July. It's kind of exciting. I used to think it was just the 4th of July, but in Norway it's May 17, here in Switzerland, August 1st, France is 10 days late, July 14. When you travel around, you find that everybody has their own dream. I was raised thinking everybody had the American dream, and then I realized that smart people didn't have the American dream. That's not a negative thing, that's a celebration. In Sri Lanka, they've got the Sri Lankan dream. It's different than my dream. Norwegians like being Norwegian. Bulgarians like being Bulgarian. I've traveled a lot in Bulgaria. I'm surprised anybody's still there. It blows me away that people decide to live their lives out in Bulgaria. But I'm humble enough to realize I don't get it. They like being Bulgarian. They might not want to live here. I might not want to live there. It's okay. He had a chip on his shoulder about this. And I thought, okay, I guess if I ate with my fingers, I might think these guys who eat with spoons and forks thought less of me. But it's just their culture. And I gave that some serious thought. For the rest of my trip through South Asia, I ate when appropriate with my fingers, what God intended them to be used for. And it actually got quite elegant. I would go to fancy restaurants filled with professional people, well-dressed people, without a spoon or fork in sight. Fancy ceremonial sink in the middle of the restaurant, people would wash their hands and eat with their fingers. It became quite natural. In fact, I had to be retrained when I got home. When you travel, you will find that there are exciting struggles going on today that we don't recognize. I was raised thinking Ethan Allen and Nathan Hale and Patrick Henry just like were the ultimate, right? Guys that only wish they had more than one life to give for their country. And then I've traveled and I've learned that these kind of guys are a dime a dozen on this planet. It's not an unpatriotic thing to say. It's just we're not unique in having great patriot heroes. And every year on this planet, 5 languages go extinct. No fanfare, no Greenpeace to mourn their loss. It's just that last person who speaks that language dies, and one little bit less of ethnic diversity on this planet. It's a remarkable thing. Now, these are such obscure little groups that they hardly know or notice, but a lot of these groups don't go out, politely. They do angry things as they're losing their struggle. And it's really exciting in your travels to learn about what the struggles are in a particular country you're visiting, and then empathize with the underdogs. Who are their heroes? A very easy one to get your brain around, if you want, is a contemporary hero, Archbishop Oscar Romero. Of course, Archbishop Romero was the popular sort of leader of the peasants and the liberation theology kind of gang down in El Salvador in the 1980s during their civil war. And he predicted that he would be shot and killed, and he would rise again in his people. And he was assassinated, and he has certainly risen in his people. And I'll tell you, I've never been so inspired as to go down there and march with the people of El Salvador when they remember their Nathan Hale, who was just shot a few years ago. Back in 5 years ago, I was ready for a vacation. Our family was going to go to Mazatlan, and I needed a break. I wanted a pristine piece of tropical beach, swept free of local riffraff, just for me to relax. And then they invited me to go to El Salvador because it's the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero. And I told my family, I'm going to be no fun on the beach in Mazatlan. I've got to go to El Salvador. And so they went to the beach. I went to San Salvador, covered with bug bites in a sweaty dorm, eating rice and beans one day and beans and rice the next. Connecting with the people of Central America. It was one of the richest travel experiences I've ever had. Perfectly safe, cost half of what a vacation in Mazatlan cost, changed my whole life. I mean, it's not right or wrong, but you have that option in your travels to go to Managua instead of Mazatlan. I'm going to Managua for Christmas this year. And then I'm going to go to El Salvador, and then I'm going to go to Mexico City for New Year's. It's going to be great. It's going to be challenging. I'll need a little break when I get home, but I'm going to come home having learned about, the biggest city on the planet and what it's like to be on the receiving end of globalization. What's it like to be in a little country that no longer has its own coins? El Salvador is dollarized. They got nickels and quarters. They got our presidents. There's a Wendy's on every corner now. There's armed guards in the middle-class neighborhoods because there's such a gap between rich and poor. It's an amazing story that most of us would be oblivious to if we weren't perverse enough to choose to go there and learn about it. Nobody's going to tell you about it here. I was marching with all the people there in El Salvador, and one of the stops on that march was a monument that looks very much like a monument we all know and love. This is the monument in the capital of El Salvador, which is a perfect knockoff of our Vietnam Memorial. And this granite has just as many names carved into it as ours does. And each one of these people died fighting you and me. We killed them. Now, maybe they were communists and we had to kill them. I'm not going to get into that. But the fact is, they're dead, and we paid for the bullets and the bombs that killed them. That's a heritage that these people live with. And every day there's loved ones at this wall thinking about their lost loved ones and thinking about America. It's just a poignant thing. I don't know what conclusions to draw, but it's something that's very real. That's why I wanted to go to Iran. I had the opportunity to go to Iran a couple years ago. The Washington State chapter of the United Nations called me up and they said, there's a lot of saber rattling and we're worried that there's going to be military action in Iran. What can we do to inspire our country to find an alternative to war? And I said, well, the only thing I can do is go there and make a TV show. And I said, but I don't have the time to figure that out, and I don't know how to get a visa. And I said, if you can get me a visa and permission, I will pay for it, and I'll get the crew together, I'll write a script, and we'll do it. And I think I can get it aired all over the country. And I thought that was the end of it. And then a week later, they called back and said, I think we got a visa. So I thought, well, that's cool. We're going to go to Iran. And I was afraid. A lot of people say, were you afraid to go to Iran? Well, yeah, I was afraid to go to Iran. I didn't really know what it was going to be like. We came this far from leaving our big camera in Athens and just taking our little camera in. Because I thought when they saw an American crew on the streets of Tehran, they'd be throwing stones at you, right? Thank goodness I had the nerve to go there with the big camera and learn about that society. I wanted to humanize 70 million Iranians. People ask me, why'd you go to Iran? I think one reason I went to Iran is because I firmly believe it's good style to know people before you bomb them. It sort of goes against our grain. It's better to dehumanize people before you bomb them, and then it doesn't hurt so much, right? But that, to me, that's just poor character. Sometimes you got to kill people with your military, but you should know them. You should cry for them, I really believe. And when you go there, that happens. And then I really believe you're less likely to come to blows and find a peaceful alternative. Now, it's tough for an American to be in Iran because you got 8-story tall banners that are very hateful that say, "Down with the USA," made with dropping bombs and skulls. That's no fun. What's an American to think when they're surrounded by hateful propaganda like that? Well, you talk to the people and you try to figure it out. Is this the people's will, or is that propaganda put on them by a frightened government? I don't know. It's complicated. Tehran is a big city. 14 million people, they say, in Tehran. 10 to 14 million people. A lot of traffic jams. I've never received such a warm welcome anywhere as when I was underneath those hateful banners. I remember being stuck in the traffic jam down here, just sitting in the back of our car, and the man in the next car asked my driver to roll down the window. He did one of these things. He handed over a bouquet of flowers, and he said, "Give this to the foreigners in your back seat and apologize for our traffic." I thought, boy, that's awfully sweet. That's never happened to me in I-5 in Seattle. Later on, I was in another traffic jam, and our driver, it was very quiet for a long time, and suddenly our driver just blurted out, "Death to traffic." And I had a double take, and I thought, what? I thought it was death to America, or death to Israel. And he said, "No, right now it's death to traffic." And I said, "Well, what's with that?" And he said, "Well, here in Iran, when something is frustrating us and out of our control, we say death to that." And I thought about that, and I thought, boy, that's a little more complicated than a bumper sticker, isn't it? And I thought, this guy doesn't speak English very well. He speaks Farsi. He's translating directly from a phrase they have in their country, which is probably literally damn. Damn this traffic. Damn America. Damn election fraud. Damn those teenagers. Have you ever thought, damn those teenagers? I have. Do I really want them to die and burn in hell for an eternity? No. It's just after midnight. Turn the music down. Damn those teenagers. Death to teenagers. It's a mistranslation. We don't understand the Farsi. Now, that doesn't excuse them for being mean and whatever, you know, but at least we owe it to ourselves to look at it a little more thoughtfully than what's doled out to us with hysterical news coverage. It's a beautiful country, Iran. I have a whole talk on Iran that I give, but you can see it on the internet if you ever want to just Google it. And if you want to see the Iran show, you can see it on KSPS occasionally, or you can just Google it, or you can watch it on Hulu.com anytime you like. Just go to Hulu and type in Iran and Rick Steves, and you can watch it. But it was a thrill to be able to go to Iran. I'm so thankful that it was able to air it. And I'll tell you, it wouldn't have seen the light of day anywhere else on the dial. It was public television and only public television that would ever risk being a Jane Fonda mouthpiece for the enemy. In public television, I was just at the National Convention for the Programmers, and I know people wrote public television out of their wills because they aired this show. No advertiser would touch this show. But there's one little place in media that is so committed to the ideals of people's media, and the power of media is so strong in our society these days. I'm just appalled at how people don't get it. People would rather watch commercial television for the rest of their lives than put up with a couple of pledge drives, you know? And you just gotta understand what society would be like if corporations controlled all the media. They would have us. We need a public alternative, or we'll never humanize our enemies, I'll tell you that much. Now, you go to a church like this, or a mosque like this, and it's very easy to make it look really scary. I remember standing there at this worship service thinking, man, I could, you know, cut in a few guerrillas jumping over barbed wire and lay on some jihadist music, and you got yourself one scary clip. Or I could spin it like, very much like my small-town Lutheran church service. It was the same thing. The sermon lasts too long. People's cell phones are going off, and they nervously turn it off. Little kids are pulling on their dad's fingers. Can't we go now? Everybody lines up and shakes the pastor or the cleric's hand afterwards. Everybody gathers in the narthex at the courtyard and tells stories and check in with each other. There's a lot of getting up and getting down, a lot of responsive readings, passing of the peace. It was a community worshiping. It was a community worshiping in a very difficult part of the world where you've got soldiers standing guard. I mean, it's just a poignant situation to go travel there. And what I realized in Iran is there's a lot of baggage. These people have a lot of baggage. Think of what baggage does for us. Think of 9/11. Think of Vietnam. Think of the Depression. This is all baggage that changes our viewpoints on things. We'd think differently if there wasn't a 9/11, you know? They'd think differently if there wasn't a Shah, or if there wasn't an Iraq-Iran war. The big baggage for Iranian people is the Shah and the Iran-Iraq war. More so, I think, the Iran-Iraq war, because they lost 300,000 people. That's a population of a quarter of ours. That would be like us losing more than 1 million people. When Saddam Hussein invaded their country, and they believe, as does the rest of the world, that the United States helped fund Saddam to invade their country. It was a horrific, like the Western Front in World War I, there between Iraq and Iran. And today, every small town has what's called a martyrs cemetery, a vast cemetery, and it's as lively with mourners today, 30 years later, as it was, as if the war was last year. And you go there and you realize, wow, a lot of people died fighting Saddam Hussein. And you see a widow weeping on the tomb of her husband or son or whatever. And you realize every week she goes there and cries and curses America. Now, she's a victim of propaganda. She's a victim of a war. She's a victim of American foreign policy. It's a very difficult thing. We might have been justified in funding Saddam to invade that country. I don't know what the deal was, but there's the human fallout that lives to this day that we have to deal with. I wanted to learn what makes these people tick. How can they elect a guy like Ahmadinejad? When Ahmadinejad says something crazy to us, is he talking to us, or is he what we would call shoring up his political base? He's elected by 50%. He's desperately shoring up his political base. His base is not the sophisticated cosmopolitan people in the big city, it's the small town people. Ahmadinejad's base is the small town, less educated, fundamentalist conservatives in their country. I had a woman walk across the street and do one of these things on my chest. She said, "Are you an American journalist?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I want you to go home and tell the truth. We're strong, we're united, and we just don't want our little girls to be raised like Britney Spears." I thought, whoa, neither do we, you know? And I just thought about that later, and it occurred to me, these people are motivated by the same thing their counterparts are here. These are caring people. They're small town, fundamentalist, poor, less educated people, motivated by the same thing their counterparts are here: fear and love. Fear and love. There's so much fear and there's so much love in that society. And the fear is really amazing. And you wonder why. You go there and you find out why. They're afraid of being invaded from the West. We did it once. We did it in 1953. We threw out their democratic elected prime minister because he nationalized their oil. We gave him a dictator that was friendly to us so we could get at the oil, the Shah. And he lived on the throne there, degrading women for a whole generation. It might not mean much to us, but for a whole generation, they lived with the offensive thought that their dictator was bragging that the miniskirts are shorter in Tehran than they were in Paris. That's fun if you're a big city person, but if you're one of those small town people, you want yourself a theocracy. You want to get out of that and whip to the other side. And thank God for Ayatollah Khomeini, you see. So it's a very interesting dynamic there. And when you travel there, you gain a much better appreciation of it. It's really interesting to me when you go to Iran, all the little insights you get into their society. For instance, I heard there were more nose jobs on women there per capita than anywhere else on the planet. And I thought, yeah, right. And I got over there, and sure enough, every block you'd see a woman recovering from a cosmetic surgery. And then I realized why. In Iran, women cannot show any shapes of their body, and they can't show any hair and no cleavage. A properly dressed woman is wearing like a sack with a neck bound up here and no hair showing. If you look at the woman giving the weather report on the TV, she's doing it just right. This is a naughty woman here who is wealthy and able to get away with murder, but normally they wouldn't show their hair, right? So what they can show, their faces and their hands, are just beautiful, just ravishing. The eye contact is enough to just slay you, you know? And I'm a girl watcher when I'm traveling. I love to watch people, and I just think girls are beautiful to watch all over the world. And in Iran, after about 5 days, I realized I just stopped looking below the chin. There's never anything to see. And I'm just analyzing myself as an animal. And my eyes, after 1 week, I'd been retrained. I no longer looked below the chin. I looked right here for a little naughty hair falling out. And that was enough to just get you so excited. A little hair right here. And that's all they got. All they can do is show a little hair right there. This is a very, very promiscuous sort of dress. When you travel around Iran, all of your norms are shaken up. It's one reason I like traveling in countries far away. I'll never forget getting to know all these girls from a school group that was out on a field trip. I was going to take their picture, and I can still hear their teacher just yelling at them. And I didn't know the Farsi, but I'm sure what she was saying is, "Girls, this Western gentleman is going to take your photograph, and you look like a bunch of floozies. Now cover up your hair." And so they got their hair all figured out, and now we can get our picture. Okay. But it's a rich travel experience, and it was a very learning thing for me. By the way, if you do pick up the Travel as a Political Act, about a 40 or 50-page journal of my experience with more of these kind of stories is all in there. It's an important part of that book. Okay, in a moment I want to talk about liberty and how different societies look at liberty. Some of them think they got a lot of it, but I just want to take like a 3 or 4 minute stretch. I want to remind you that when you came in, I shipped some of these things over. I just had a great opportunity to collaborate with the people at the Smithsonian Magazine, and they wanted me to write a whole magazine. I thought, well, that's sounds like a lot of work, but they said you can make your top 20 destinations, and I thought, cool, I'll do that. And I just assumed I was going to use my art, and they said, well, we'll take care of the art. And I was kind of jealous about my art, but I'm so thankful they were strong about that, because I've never seen my writing paired with real Smithsonian quality art. It's just a delight for me as a travel writer to have their mastery of magazines and photography and so on. And I liked it so much I bought an extra 50,000 copies of this, and I just give them away everywhere I go. So if you'd like one, you grab one of those in the back. Also, I sent over the most important part of my business. I work in Edmonds, just north of Seattle, and we've got 80 people out here through the back door, and we're just working really hard, producing more guidebooks and radio shows and TV shows and tours and so on. This is a brochure about our tour program. It's got a DVD in it, which gives you a real frank and candid look at what it's like to travel with us. If you're curious about our tour program, last year we took 400 groups around Europe, small groups, great guides, 20 different itineraries, and we've got an exciting rundown of tours coming up this year. So those are in the back. And let's see, why don't we let's just take a 5-minute stretch, and then we'll sit back down and I'll finish off with about 20 more minutes, okay? Thank you. Yeah. Was ever rousted in Iran? Sounds like something that would happen in a fraternity or something like that. I don't know what you mean by rousted. What do you mean?
I already know you.
Oh yeah, Iran is a very paranoid country with all sorts of overlapping security. And we had a minder with us from the government. Anybody can travel in Iran. It's like traveling in the Soviet Union in the old days. You just have to have a tour and your hotel's arranged. But it's a huge popular destination for Europeans. The Lonely Planet Guide sells great to Iran. There's a new edition out. Our government knew I was going to Iran. It was no problem. They won't give you a visa unless you line up all your tour. They don't want people running around on their own any more than we want Iranians running around in our country on their own, you know. But we had our minder, and everybody thinks, you know, were you being like channeled here and there? But I didn't have any agenda to do a 60 minutes expose on their treatment of Baha'is or terrorism or nuclear power plants. I just wanted to learn about the culture, so I had no problem. Yeah. What's the most unpleasant place I've ever visited? Orlando. Yeah. All right, yeah. Any other, yeah. Do you get a better cultural experience in the big cities or the small towns? You know, I think you get a better experience in the small towns. I just was talking to Paul Theroux. He just wrote a book about Africa, and he's adamant about, you know, if you fly from capital to capital to capital, you're not going to have the richest experience as if you take the bus through the bush and get out in the villages. And wherever I go, if I'm in the villages, I get a richer experience. By the way, I want to remind you that I'm really thankful that my TV show runs on KSPS. And tonight we're going to see a lot of shows. We're going to see two shows on, you haven't seen these shows, these are brand new. 2 shows on Spain, 2 shows on former Yugoslavia, including a visit to Bosnia and Montenegro, and then a couple shows on Norway, where my heritage is. And I'm just really excited about the new show, so I hope you can watch that. But I'm thankful to be on KSPS, but I was thinking of, in that regard, I interviewed Paul Theroux for my radio show. And my show airs on Saturday morning on your local public radio station. It's an hour each week. We've been doing that now for 5 years, and it's a chance for me to talk to these kind of people. But Paul Theroux was just adamant about you experience more in the villages, and you know, big cities can be more homogenous and all the same, but you get out to the countryside, and that's where you find the salt of the earth, more traditional kind of, you know, Americana for that country. It'd be the same in the United States, I think. Any other questions, comments? Yeah. Am I more welcome in the countries because of who I am? Well, you know, if I go to restaurants and hotels and little folk shows and they know who I am, they're going to give me the royal treatment, yeah. And I have to be careful that doesn't mess up my ability to do my research without being seduced and corrupted. You know, it's fun to, I let them try to seduce me, but I'll stay for free in a hotel and then not sleep well and drop it out of the book. I don't owe them anything, you know, so I'm not corruptible that way. You know, when I travel, they don't know who I am. I don't want to waste time being met at the airport by a woman in a dirndl who wants to show me all the cultural cliches. I'd much rather just get out there and go into the markets and meet people and go to the pubs or whatever. Yeah. Yes?
Have you traveled to Colombia?
Have I traveled to Colombia? No, I haven't, but I have friends who have traveled in Colombia, and it's notorious for Medellin, right, and all the drug kind of lords and stuff. But right now, a huge change in Colombia, and people say it has a scary image, but it's completely safe and charming to travel in, actually. I think it's considered more safe and comfortable than Venezuela. I don't know South America very well, but I think if you look in my radio archives, I interviewed a man and his wife who traveled on their bikes through Colombia from village to village and just had a wonderful time. And they didn't know what they'd expect. And I've since then met lots of people who have traveled in South America, and I always hear Colombia it's perfectly safe to go there. I mean, you know, South America is a little more dangerous than Europe, just in general, but Colombia is no longer a place that you'd want to steer clear of. Yes, in the back.
We're parents of a 1.5-year-old daughter, and we've always been world travelers. So after she was born, we started traveling with her. So she just took her 38th flight home from Indonesia with us last week. Now I'm interested in going to India, but I'm very concerned about her being too young. At what age do you think would be appropriate to bring a child to India?
Your child's 1.5?
Yes.
I would not want a 1.5-year-old child in India. If somebody had a 1.5-year-old and they asked me where they would go, I'd say drop by Grandma and Grandpa's on the way to the airport. You know, India is so rough and tumble, and you just want to immerse yourself in India. And I would be nervous about all sorts of hygiene things and so on in India. You know, I'm sorry. Did you have another question? Teenager. India is my favorite country. It's just a mind-blowing place. I would say it's a great place to go after you graduate out of high school or something like that. Yeah, but India's pretty, it's a personal thing. I don't write about India or take groups there. I just wouldn't want to have to orchestrate people's happiness in India. It's a very individual thing. I'm easy orchestrating your happiness in Ireland, but not India. Yeah?
Do you have any plans to take your cameras to Palestine?
It's, you know, that's a good question. I thought, what am I going to do to follow up Iran? And I'd love to do Palestine. I just don't want to get embroiled in that. I'm just wimping out. I think it would be very hard to get people to listen to the Palestine-Israeli story the way it needs to be told. I'm still thinking about it. I don't think I can get into Gaza. You can't get into Gaza without Israel's permission, and Israel doesn't want a film crew in Gaza. So it's a complicated thing. There's other stuff I would do before that, but that needs to be done. I just don't know enough about it to do it justice. Boy, that'd be exciting, though. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah?
Do you ever hear about Americans living and working?
Do I ever hear about Americans living and working in Europe? Oh, yeah. How are Americans accepted in Europe? Americans are accepted in Europe wonderfully. Europe wants Americans to come in and to renovate these little, you know, rundown fixer-uppers in Tuscany and so on. They have policies that encourage that. They're part of the community. I'm skeptical that somebody can move in you're in Provence style, you know, or under the Tuscan sun style, and suddenly be a connoisseur of that culture. But if you have the right attitude, if you learn the language and you get to know people and you're part of the community, you're part of the community. And after a few years, you're respected as part of the community. Other people go there and they just want a change in weather, but not a change in culture. And they live a parallel world. All over southern Spain, there are expat communities that are just garishly ethnocentric. It's just Belgians here, Irish there, Danes here, Germans there, Brits there. And they have their own radio stations, their own schools, their own shops. Spaniard comes into town and they complain you can't even find Spanish on a menu. So there's that extreme case. But for the Americans that want to, you know, adopt a country and retire in Europe or something, it happens all the time and people love it. Yes, in the back.
How do you, as a person of faith, reconcile some of the social justice issues you must see in your travels in terms of the abundance that we have in our country and the lack of abundance in other countries, particularly among certain classes?
That's a good question. How does a Christian who cares about economic justice handle all of that stuff, I guess? One issue right off the bat is, okay, I'm going down to El Salvador for my holiday, and I'm going to spend as much going down there and back as the guy I'm going to photograph earns in 3 years to feed his kids, you know? and I'm just going down there for kicks. Now, is that good stewardship? And I'd say if you learn and come back and live with empathy with those people, it's very good stewardship. And I feel it's a good investment. But if I go down there and I just go to some resort and I enjoy golfing and fruity drinks and never meet a local person and come home having left money in foreign adventures in that country and I come back not having any empathy for those people, then I think that's lousy stewardship. We'll talk about it in a few minutes here, I'm impressed by the gap between rich and poor and how Americans have a tough time with that. And I think it's an interesting thing from a Christian or a person of faith point of view, how ignorance can be so blissful. And people choose to be unknowing about that. And I don't have much respect for that. I have a hunger to know what it's like. I don't need a guilt trip. I'm not guilty. I just want to be engaged and caring and learning and part of the solution instead of, ignorantly blissful. So, that's a very important issue. Question here.
I have used Canadian luggage tags for years. I took it to Canada and my students told me not long ago, the only people who use Canadian luggage tags are Americans.
I always wonder about that, what Canadians think when they see somebody with a Canadian flag that's not Canadian. All right. It's fun to, one more question here, yeah. Can Europeans recognize you? Yeah, they can recognize you in the dead of night. I don't know what it is, but when you come into town, they know there's an American. And I don't know what it is, but there's something about us, they just know that's an American. Part of it might be we've got a camera bouncing on our belly and we're just going, wow, that's big, that's old, wow. But they just know who we are. And I don't try to hide the fact that I'm an American because it's futile. I like to dress appropriately and, try to melt in, but I'm not disguising the fact that I'm an American. I want to not be a judgmental or ethnocentric American. I want to celebrate their way of life while I'm there. And it's really fun because I go home and I'm thankful I'm not having to be like that, or I incorporate a little bit of that in my lifestyle. It's a cool kind of way to travel. Is there a question here? Yeah. Well, the beautiful American smile is interesting, especially when you're in a place like Belfast, because you just notice bad dentition, right? You go to some countries and there's not a set of braces in the whole country, and it's just kind of, and also you go to some countries and you just feel like, God, they have terrible diets here. I won't say which countries, but you just, people look like all they do is eat French fries. And it's very interesting just to travel around, get into these communities and try to observe and see what makes them tick and what might they do a little different. Okay, well, it's fun to answer these questions. I do have to hustle along here because we've got to be out of here at 7. I want to talk, and basically, if you have any more questions about travel and so on, there's so much on our website. If you go to ricksteves.com, you've got all the scripts of all the TV shows. You've got the archive of 5 years of radio shows. You've got just my blog and just lots of stuff happening. I want to mention one thing we're very excited about is creating our audio tours. We've got all of our audio tours now available free via iTunes. And these are like, you'd spend $50 to get a guide to walk you through Trastevere in Rome. And our audio tours, I think, work better for a lot of people, and they're free. You just get your kids to download it for you, okay? And put it on your iPod or your iTouch, and then you're over there and you have all these tours. We've covered now with really well-designed tours of all the major sites and walks in London, Paris, Venice, Florence, and Rome. And in the next month, I'm going to do Athens, Vienna, and Salzburg. And they're entirely free, and you just grab them off the internet. Our new thing in January is going to be an app that deconstructs all of our radio shows and organizes them in country-specific playlists. So if you're going to Portugal, you can just take that file, and you got all the material relating to Portugal there to listen to when you're in a traffic jam or on the airplane or going to bed after your partner or whatever, and you just want to spend some time listening. So I hope you can take advantage of that. Okay. In the hometown of Salvador Dali, Cadaqués in northwest Spain, they're really into their freedom. And this always reminds me that, everybody appreciates their liberties, their lifestyle. It's so fun to see societies having sort of ingrained ways of sharing their tradition from one generation to the next. Here in a little town in Italy, every summer on a certain day, the older kids teach the younger kids how to make a good ravioli. And just to watch that, it's just heartwarming. In a little town here in France, the Chamber of Commerce decided it's worth the investment to create an exhibit where people actually get to develop a nasal appreciation of the fine differences between the wine that they produce in that part of France. So here you have a good nose is a life skill worth investing in. All over Europe, you find people who knowingly pay too much for a loaf of bread in order to buy it from the person who baked it. And I just think that's really interesting. In the United States, we're proud of having a freezer in the garage, so we only have to go shopping every 2 weeks. In Europe, they intentionally have a very small refrigerator under their sink, so they have to go to the market every morning. It's part of the fabric of their communities. They want to check in with people. They want to know the person that made their cheese, and so on. Europeans love their fine wine, and they know how to fill it up cheap. They have literal filling stations for table wine, and it's like cheaper than bottled water. All over Europe, you have, all over the world, smart, thoughtful societies grapple with the same challenges we grapple with, and they come up with different solutions. What do you do with your garbage? In Switzerland, you pay a lot for the garbage bag, and it comes with disposal. So you don't hire a garbage truck or anything like that. You leave the garbage bag out, and every morning it's gone. In England, they don't stop in the middle of nowhere at an intersection. You have a roundabout. In the Netherlands, you have a park and pedal, or you take the train in and you pick up your bike. Here you've got 4-story tall bicycle garage. It's so full you have a hard time finding a place to park your bike. All over the world, people do not like junk mail. In Europe, they have a very simple solution called a decal. You just paste something on your mailbox that says yes or no to junk mail. And most people say no. I'm fascinated by how America is into legislating morality. It's an interesting issue. We're all moral people. Everybody in this room is moral, but I bet there's not 2 moralities that are exactly the same in here. It's all a little bit different depending on your life view, your life experience. We all are moral. Who can make a law to say one person's moral and one's not? Now, Europe takes it to quite an extreme. They don't believe that you can legislate morality. My friends in Europe tell me a society has to make a choice: tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. And then they always follow up by reminding me, you in America lock up 10 times as many people as we do per capita. Either you are inherently more criminal, or there's something screwy with your laws. And I don't know really I think I know what the answer is. But it's, when you go to Europe, you find red light districts. You got brothels. You got 6-story tall brothels all over Europe. Now, nobody says prostitution is good. It's an ugly thing. But the reality is there are lonely men all over the world that want to pay for sex. It's just always been, it always will be. You cannot legislate that away. You can't wish that away. You can't just say no that away. In Europe, they have legalized prostitution, where the prostitutes are unionized. They can't have their license unless they're checked by a nurse to make sure that they're healthy and not spreading diseases. They run little businesses. And when they have a bad customer, they push their emergency button, and the pimp does not come to rescue them, but the local policeman does. Now that's just their pragmatic approach to that. Doesn't work perfectly. There's still a lot of problems, but the attempt is to take the crime and the disease and the violence out of it, rather than criminalize it, you see. And it makes a very interesting sightseeing attraction. These kids are drunk. When I'm in Scandinavia, the streets in May and June are filled with noisy, drunk teenagers. And I asked my Scandinavian friends finally, well, what's with this? And they say, well, it's graduation time. And when the kids graduate from high school, the parents hire a driver in a truck, the kids decorate it, and the parents host the kegger. And they go from one parent's house to the next, just getting blitzed. And it's not that the parents want their kids to get drunk, it's just kids will get drunk when they graduate. In America, we make our kids promise not to drink and drive. And kids drink and drive, they lie to their parents, and they die. In Scandinavia, they have a more pragmatic approach to it. Okay, kids, we'll provide this and a driver, and you can party and nobody will die. In Scandinavia, nobody lies, nobody drinks and drives and dies, you see? So that's a tough sell in America, but the point is, to me, that's a classic, pragmatic, harm reduction approach to a drug abuse problem. And Europeans are really into pragmatic harm reduction. I was recently in a coffee shop, in a Starbucks in Zurich, and I needed to go downstairs to the bathroom. Went into the bathroom, all blue lights. It's confusing. Why are these blue lights here? And then I realized, oh yeah, I can't see my veins. I couldn't shoot up if I wanted to. Maddening. And then I realized if you have any sort of a warm public place in Europe, you don't want junkies in there shooting up. It's just bad for business, you know? And Europe has a lot of junkies in the streets. Now, a lot of my tourists would say, look at these liberal Europeans. They got junkies everywhere. They should get real about their drug laws. No, they don't have more people using drugs. They're just not dead or not in jail. They're in the streets. They're dealing with the problem. They're getting their lives back on track. Last year, the United States lost 18,000 people to heroin overdoses. Europe lost 8,000 people to heroin overdoses. We have two different ways of dealing with that problem. In Europe, drug abuse is a serious issue. People are not pro-drugs in Europe any more than they are here in the United States. They just take the crime out of the equation and like to deal with it as a health problem and an education challenge. And they like their way of doing it. The United States is more just say no, and we will lock people up if they disobey. It doesn't work very well from a European perspective. Across the street from that blue toilet, there's a machine bolted to the railing of the bridge that used to sell cigarettes. Now it sells syringes. Government-subsidized syringes. I never noticed this till a couple of years ago, and now I go around Switzerland and there's these syringe machines everywhere. You just don't notice them. But nobody is passing needles around, and there's no disease associated with needle drug use in Switzerland because they have this progressive harm reduction approach to a persistent problem. Okay, you got your junkies and your heroin addicts, they got their needles, they can't shoot up at Starbucks, what's going on? Down the alley, they've got a discreet little place called Cafe Fix. It's a heroin maintenance clinic. Drug addicts know they can go there and deal with nurses and counselors. They can administer their addiction without robbing to get more money, to pay for it on the streets, without wondering, is this pure? Is this going to kill me if I overdose? Without the nervousness of topping up just because they don't know where they're going to get their next fix. They've got their fix. It's free, it's safe as it can be, it's with medical help and counseling, so these people can then get themselves back on their tracks and back in the workforce. I don't think anybody wants to be a wasted needle addict, and in Europe, they're dealing with it that way. I find it really, really interesting to learn about that, especially when you consider the frustration that America is having when it comes to dealing with drug abuse problems. Now, of course, the big issue in discussion in the United States these days is marijuana. How do you deal with the marijuana problem? Europe has a way to deal with, it's hard to talk about Europe in big strokes because every country has a different policy, okay? So I can talk in general, Europe might be this way, but there are countries in Europe that are more hard on marijuana than the United States is. And there are countries where a joint is about as exciting as a can of beer. For 25 years in the Netherlands, they've not arrested people for smoking marijuana. It's been decriminalized. It would be legal, except that if you legalize it, you get into a trade war with the United States. My friends in Denmark tell me, be careful with marijuana. Every year we have to arrest a couple of people on marijuana charges so we can maintain our favored trade status with the United States of America. That's my country. In the Netherlands, you've got a coffee shop. It's, you know, it's a big business. Anybody who wants to smoke marijuana goes to a coffee shop. And a lot of people say, well, in the United States, isn't that going to like open the floodgates and everybody's going to be smoking pot? They've had a 25-year experience with letting marijuana be sold in pubs legally, and use has not gone up. As a matter of fact, the Dutch people, by everybody's assessment, our governments and their governments smoke half what we do per capita. And the Dutch smoke less than the European average, even though they have the most liberal laws. The conclusion, which is very clear if you look at the experience of 25 years of a track record, in many countries, there is no correlation between use and how hard the laws are. A lot of Americans think there's a reservoir of people that would just love to ruin their lives by smoking marijuana if only it was legal. And the fact is, if it was legal tomorrow, you'd have a little blip in the use, and then it would just mellow out, and it would be about as it was before. 80% of the Dutch people, I've heard, have never smelled marijuana. It's just not a big deal. It's just if you want to smoke it, it's there. You go through a stage and you get into it, and most people get over that in a couple of years. And some artistic and bohemian types will be smoking it for the rest of their life, and that's better than criminalizing it as far as Europe is considered. In Spain, I was just there filming it. You'll see it. I don't know if tonight we're going to show that show, but we'll see it in one of our shows. Marijuana is sold in shops just like, you'd have a Home Depot here. You can't sell marijuana, but you can sell seeds and all the stuff so you can grow it on your own. That's the Spanish approach to it. In Portugal, 10 years ago, they legalized the consumption of all drugs, soft and hard, and they really like that. There's been no drug tourism because of that, and use has not gone up, and now people can treat it as a health problem rather than a criminal problem. Some people say, isn't marijuana a gateway drug? And Europeans who have essentially legalized marijuana have found out that the only thing gateway about marijuana is if it's illegal. Then the only way you can get it is buying it from a criminal who has a vested interest in selling you stuff that's more addictive and more profitable. So these are all interesting issues, and it's going to be in the news, and there's going to be a lot of shrill discussion and bumper stickers. I've been talking about this for 10 years because I think it's a harm reduction issue. There's 80,000 people in jail today in our country because of marijuana. We arrested 800,000 people last year because of marijuana. And, rich white guys don't get arrested. It's minorities and poor people get arrested. It's a real mess. And it's a horrible situation, and we're going to change it. I've been speaking out on it I've been a board member of NORML now for 10 years. Some people say, we're not going to take your tours anymore because I know what you think about marijuana. And all I can think is Europe's going to be more fun without you. I have to go to these coffee shops in Amsterdam just because it's in my guidebook and I have to update the material. And, a lot of people wonder, okay, if it's illegal, aren't they going to be selling it to kids and everything? Nobody. I've never met anybody that wants to make marijuana legal for minors. It's an adult activity. Nobody who's intoxicated with anything should get off easy. In Europe, they throw the book at you harder than they do here if you're drinking or smoking and driving. Aren't they going to be advertising marijuana? No, they're not. You go into a coffee shop, and this is what I do when I research a book. I go into a place, whatever it is. In the case of a coffee shop, I'm thinking like a tourist. What do I do now? And how do I spend my money? There's no indication of what I can buy. So I ask the guy, well, what's for sale? And he says, well, because of our laws, I can't tell you what's for sale. You have to push that button. And I push a button, and as long as I hold it down, a light is turned on, and it illuminates the menu. But you see, this is sort of a legal splitting hair thing, but they've got a law that says you can't advertise it, you can't push it on people. I have to take the initiative to push the button, and as long as I hold it down, I can read what's for sale. So it's a fun issue that people deal with, and it's essentially legal. You can get whatever kind of joint you like anywhere in the Netherlands. What I've learned about drug policy is not from talking to a bunch of heads, but from talking to policemen and judges and people who are concerned about this in policy areas, and it's a fascinating area to study. If you want to learn more about it, you can just Google me, Rick Steves, and marijuana and get more than you'll ever realize. When you think about the differences between Europe and the United States, it's a fascinating thing. We're similar societies. We're rich, we're Christian, we're capitalist, we're really into our freedom. And what is the difference? Europe is passionate about its government by, for, and of the people, and we're passionate about government by, for, and of the people. The difference, I think, is we are government by, for, and of the people via the corporations we own. It's not a good or a bad thing, it's just we have a government that creates a good business environment so we can prosper. And I'll tell you, I'm thankful I'm running my business here in the United States and not in Europe. It would be demoralizing for me to run my business in Europe. I like our environment for guerrilla entrepreneurial business. In Europe, they have government by, for, and of the people in spite of what's good for the corporations that they own. Because they're more interested in sustainability and economic justice and all that kind of stuff. In Europe, you'd be much more likely to see a law that requires you to pay for the disposal of your car when you buy it. That would never happen here because that would be bad for business. But maybe that's honest for accounting and good for sustainability of the environment. That would be a European-style law. When you want to see Europe in the extreme, You go to Scandinavia. Scandinavia is the most highly taxed, most socialistic part of Europe. I'm going to be like 7 minutes, and then we'll go, okay? Scandinavia is the most, when Americans are threatened by Europe, Scandinavia is what really gives them nightmares. In Scandinavia, you have the most highly taxed part of Europe, and when you go to the main square, you don't see a church, you see a city hall. And it's like, it's the religion of humanism. You have a city hall with a big nave and a lectern instead of a pulpit, and murals behind the pulpit that celebrate not Bible stories, but heroic individuals who contributed mightily to their society. That's humanism, you see. These are the least church-going people in Europe, the most highly taxed people in Europe, and by every measure, every time they have a tally on who are the most content people on the planet, you see those Scandinavians up there, okay? So, is it right or wrong? I don't know, but they like it, and they have high expectations for the taxes that they pay. But that's the city hall in Oslo, right in the main square. This is my friend Ollie. He's a school teacher in Switzerland. He's one of my sounding boards in Europe, and I love to hang out with Ollie. I go hiking with him, and I hang out with his family. A little while ago, I asked him, just to try to figure out how they think, Ollie, how can you Swiss people so docilely pay such high taxes? And without missing a beat, he said, well, what's it worth to live in a country where there's no homelessness, no hunger, and where everybody, regardless of the economic status of their parents, every child gets access to quality health care and education? He's not a crusader, he's not a liberal, that's just the ethic of Europe. They've got a higher threshold of decency there, and it doesn't threaten their capitalistic work-hard sort of system. They just don't want desperate people living in tents across the street. So, we can look at that and we can learn from it. One thing Americans are not very good at, we are compassionate people. There's no doubt about it, we're good people. But we're not very good at dealing with the gap between the haves and the have-nots. We find a way to be oblivious to it. And when you travel, you have it in your face. You have those dirty little fingers coming through your window when you roll it down. And you can't travel in an honest way without understanding that half of humanity, 3 billion people, are trying to live on $2 or $3 a day. There's a huge gap between rich and poor. A full billion people are trying to live on $1 a day. I want to know about that. I want to study that. I want to gain an appreciation for that. And I've learned, after lots of traveling in those parts of the world, that even if you're motivated only by greed, if you know what's good for you, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world. It's not a good place to raise your kids. Here in a middle-class neighborhood in San Salvador, everybody teams up and hires an armed guard to stand on every corner. You just don't live in a middle-class neighborhood without armed guards. When I doze off on my tour bus in Central America, if I hit speed bumps, I know if I open my eyes and look over there, I'm going to see the home of a rich person. You don't build a mansion without putting in speed bumps, so angry poor people have to slow down before throwing something explosive into your garden. I don't want to live behind designer fortifications. This is a little microcosm, but it can be as a society in general. Europeans tell me the hottest thing in real estate in our society is prisons for the poor and gated communities for the rich. I'm not sure if that's right, but it's not a very good situation if it is. And when I travel, I realize that these little girls are just as precious as my little girl. My little girl's got $5,000 for straight teeth and money left over for whitener. I noticed every little kid in her classroom apparently had the wherewithal to scrape together $5,000 for braces because they all got braces. And then, I realized these little girls are living on a garbage dump and they don't have water. Their moms are gone half their waking hours just walking for water and firewood. And it gets worse every year. Now, it's not, my girl gets braces. I'm in a winning system, I work hard, my girl gets braces. But that doesn't get me off the hook from recognizing that for the cost of 2 sets of braces, you could build a well in this village and those girls could have mothers that stay home and nourish them and raise them, and they would have running water. It's not a guilt trip to acknowledge how wealthy and blessed we are. It's an opportunity. And I'll tell you, we've got enough power on this planet to really wage a lot of soft power. For the cost of 2 sets of braces to build a well, then every time people go to that well and pump that handle, they'll think America as they get their water. That's good for national security. Not to mention it's good from just a compassion and a decency point of view. We've got some exciting challenges, some really unprecedented challenges facing us. We've got this violent, Islam that we've got to deal with. We've got a horrible gap between the haves and the have-nots on this planet. Got global warming, lots of other stuff. And when we travel, we gain a broader perspective to come home and deal with that. Everybody is going to deal with these challenges in a different way, depending on their life's story. What's different about mine is I've traveled a lot. The value of travel is nothing new. 1,500 years ago, Muhammad said, don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled. Thomas Jefferson traveled, and he wrote that travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. Mark Twain traveled, and I love his famous quote. He said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. I've traveled, and it's so exciting to just gain an empathy for people outside of our country. I'll never forget in a park in Oslo on my very first trip. My parents were just loving me. I remember from my little teeny bopper point of view, my parents were just like unreasonably loving to me. And I looked out over that park and it was just speckled with parents loving their children the same way. And it occurred to me, wow, this world is filled with equally lovable little children of God. Let me just finish with kind of an image. It's one of my favorite activities as a tour guide. I love to expose my travelers to an understanding of another religion, another culture. We're in Eastern Turkey, and we want to get to know a whirling dervish, those monks that whirl around in cruise ship entertainment evenings. And we were going to go up on his roof, the sun was going to go down, he was going to pray, and we're going to watch him get dizzy. And he said, I'm not a photo op. You can come up here and watch me pray, but you're going to understand what I'm doing. I said, that's cool. I had 20 Americans with me on my tour. And I'll just paraphrase what he said. He said, I'm a dervish. That's like a monk that follows Mevlana, who's kind of the St. Francis of Islam, sort of a prophet of love. And I go up on my rooftop 5 times a day, and I get into a meditative trance, and I spin around. And I think about God, and I think about my faith, and I think about my community and this great creation. And he says, when I worship, I plant one foot in my community, the other foot goes around, acknowledging God's great creation and all of its diversity. And I whirl around like this, thinking about my home, my family, and the diversity on this planet. One arm goes up to my Creator to accept His love. The other hand goes down like the spout on a tea kettle, showering God's love onto His creation. And I whirl around, and I lose myself in that thought. And he goes around. I'm just sitting there with the sun going down and all of my tour members watching this guy, and his robe billows out, his head tilts over, he gets into this beautiful meditative trance, thinking about God's love and His creation. And I look at him and I go, whoa, that guy is different than me, but he's really fundamentally the same. And now I better understand him, and I can go home and not be afraid of him. And it occurs to me that's the most precious souvenir, is to go home with a broader perspective, being more comfortable in this planet. And then, if I take that broader perspective and I put it to work as a citizen of this great and powerful nation, that's making travel a political act, and I think that is a very constructive thing. I have enjoyed my quick visit to this beautiful campus, met a lot of nice people. I thank you for coming out tonight and sharing, letting me share all these ideas with you. I wish you happy travels, okay? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Very nice to be here.